We are in week 3 of a series called Starting Point. And the entire premise for this series is very simply this, that faith has a starting point, right? And this is true about everything. We actually said in week 1 that everything has a starting point. And you had a starting point. And for some of you, you were started on purpose. And others of you may have been started by accident, but we're so glad you're started and that you're here with us today. And so it can be easy for us to forget that faith has a starting point, can't it? Sometimes we miss that. It can be hard for us to see that. But isn't it true? Isn't it true that our faith, for all of us, had a place where it began, where it started? For most of us, for many of us, this may have happened when we were kids. You know, we heard something. Maybe somebody worked with us or our parents to help build this framework of faith in our lives to give us a foundation. But somewhere along the line for a lot of us, we started to outgrow the things that we were told in the ways that we were told them as we were kids. And so this discrepancy or this gap started to build in our lives. And what we once believed or thought we believed, we really wrestled and we didn't know if we believed it anymore as grown-ups. And so your Sunday school faith, the things you learned as a kid, they didn't stand up too well under the pressure and the questions of adult life. And this wasn't anyone's fault. You didn't mean to leave faith behind for those of us who actually walked away. But as distance started to grow between the thing that we used to believe and the things that we start to experience now, as that gap widens, for many of us, it feels like the only time we see our faith is when we look in the rearview mirror. And for many of you, New Hope has actually been the place or one of those places where you've come and you've come back. You've actually had a new starting point, and you've reestablished faith in a way that is different and meaningful. And for me, I am more passionate than ever about making sure that this is a place where that can always happen. I was actually at a conference this week, and in the last session, Bill Hybels said this great thing. He said, there's all these really bad reasons to start a new church, but there's 2 great ones, and I'm only going to give you the second one because the second one was we spent all this time talking about. He said, if there's no other existing church or ministry that is willing to risk as much as you are so that other people can come to know Jesus. He said, that's one of the only good reasons to begin a church. We don't just exist to have a fun place for us to come and hang out together and learn a little bit, right? Right? We exist to do crazy things, trusting that God will bring people to Jesus, and they can have brand new starting points in their life. So here's what we've done with this series. If we were starting all over again, we've asked the question, what would that need to look like? And what are the questions that we would need to ask? What would our starting point be? And because this builds on itself, if for whatever reason you weren't here for week 1 on Easter Sunday or week 2 last week, I just want to encourage you, go online. It's NHLoud/media. Go online. You can watch the messages there for free. Go to the bookstore, grab a DVD. Because all of these pieces, the parts of this series, are going to fit together. And if you're missing one or multiple parts of it, it won't make as much sense in the end when it comes together. So please keep tracking. Watch these at home if you want, as a family, with friends in your small group, however that makes sense for you. But it's not only that our faith has a starting point. This is true as well. The story of faith has a starting point. There's a story behind our faith. From a long, long, long time ago, it has a history, and for most of us, we don't care about history, right? You don't like history. You only took the one history class you had to take? Because for many of us, here's how it works, right? You don't want to know all the backstory or all the history, because for most of us, we think this: God, it's Thursday, and I've been asking you for the same thing since Monday. And I need to know if you're going to show up. I need to know if I can deal with you, if we can interact with each other, or if I'm just sort of left out on my own. God, I need to know if you're going to help me out with this test that I really didn't get as much studying in for as I should have, that it happens in an hour. We want to know these things are in our busy lives. Can we count on God or not? And this is why, for some of you, you actually walked away from faith, because when things got difficult, you didn't know the backstory. And today we're going to actually spend some time, and we're going to go way back in time, and we're going to look at something that's incredibly important, that all of us have wrestled with at some point. We've all struggled with this. We've all asked this question. And so this is going to help us as we consider faith and as we consider God. Here's something else that you may not have thought of for a while, or you may not even know. Interesting thing. The three largest faith traditions, the three largest world religions, claim the same starting point. Did you know that? Islam, Judaism, and Christianity have the same starting point. Islam believed that Adam was the first man. They teach that. They teach that he was the first Muslim, and he was the first prophet. The Jews believe in Adam and Eve, and the creation story. That's part of their tradition, their belief system. Interestingly, as Christians, we believe in Adam and Eve not so much because it's recorded in the book of Genesis. We actually believe in Adam because Jesus talked about Adam, and Jesus said that Adam was a real human being. Because as Christians, we have this crazy thing that we believe. We actually believe that if there's a guy who could predict his own death and resurrection and pull it off, we're going to go with what he said. All right? So Jesus says this, and this is why we believe in it and put even more stock on it. And all the three big faith traditions believe that God created the world and that what he created was good, and that there was this first person, and that something at some point went wrong. That we as humanity took God's perfect creation, and somehow through our own choices we messed everything up. Now, you may not believe in Adam and Eve, might not believe in that story, but most people will agree, like we talked about last week, that we've messed things up, right? That somewhere along the way things broke, and we were responsible for that. And I pushed into you guys last week. We talked a bunch about this. Remember what I said? It's more than just, we're not just what? Do you remember the word? Mistakers. We're not just mistakers. In fact, we might actually be what? Sinners. Because what do you call, and because some of us are like, oh, no, I just like to think about, I've made some mistakes. But what in the world do you call the person who's made mistake after mistake after mistake on purpose? Well, you call it what it is. We're sinners, all of us. And so, all the faith traditions believe it started good, and along the way we made a decision and we messed it up. And the other things that the faith traditions believe are that after things went bad, God started the work of setting things right through a single man. And this man's name was Abraham. Abraham is where all of the faith traditions, the big three, they come together, but it's also where they take separate paths. Islam goes one way, Judaism takes another path, and hundreds of years later, as Christianity sprouts its wings, it goes a third direction. But the things we all have in common is that we all claim Abraham as our father or as our founder. It's the place where we start. And so this is where God begins to intersect with history and start addressing the problem of sin through this man, Abraham. Now, that's the interesting part. This is sort of part of the history, but I don't bring it up because I want you to believe in Adam and Eve, or I want you to believe in the Genesis account of creation. You can figure all that stuff out or have those conversations. I'd even be happy to have them with you. I don't even care so much if you believe in Abraham, but the thing I want you to see here, the thing that is unbelievable, I bring this up because there's this conversation that's recorded in the book of Genesis between God and Abraham, and it touches on a tension that every single one of us have felt, and that you're perhaps feeling even right now based on your childhood faith. And it's linked to a question that we all ask: if there's a God, how am I doing? Have you ever felt that? I talk to people all the time, and they're basically asking this, I don't know how God thinks about me. I don't know how God feels about me. I've done this. I've made that mistake. I've sinned in this way. I'm not really sure. I have faith. I've prayed some prayers, but I'm not really sure. God, how are we really doing? God, where do I stand when it comes to you? Do you hear my prayers? Do you even care? Have you ever wondered that? Have you ever wondered, just in a complete, honest way, God, where do I stand with you? And if life was to end, what would happen to me? It's a question I think most of us wrestle with. So in this conversation between Abraham and God, there's this statement that he makes that is so perplexing that I actually want to bring it up today, and I want to leave it with you guys this week to wrestle with. And it takes Abraham from more than just a character, a person in history, and it makes him personal. See, there's this Abraham and you dynamic. It sort of hits home for us. And so before we look at that, I want to tell you just another story that gives us a bit of a backdrop that helps us to understand God's dilemma as he looks into history and he sees all of the problems and the brokenness and the sin and the fallenness, and he's sort of wondering, where do I begin and how do I begin? So this is before he engages with Abraham. Let me tell you this story. So I've got a picture here. How many of you have been filled with fear because of something like this? It's my son Christopher. Thankfully, he always does that. I don't know why we do this. We always put the cups he uses because they're the biggest, and he always needs is anyone else's kids like this? For whatever reason, they need to have a half liter of whatever they're drinking at any point in time. So he's always reaching up to the shelf he can't really reach, and you can't see this so much, but all the other cups except those plastic ones on that shelf pretty much are glass. The whole shelf underneath, thankfully some of them are in the dishwasher right now, are glass. And then the whole bottom area is some plates and some bowls that are all glass. And so every time I see the cupboard doors wide open and Christopher sort of reaching up, I have a little bit of fear. Because have you ever put a shelf in? And have you ever noticed, we put a lot, the shelf is fairly heavy, and then we put a whole bunch of glasses and plates and bowls and other stuff on those shelves, and all that stuff is heavy. Did you ever notice the thing that holds all the heavy stuff? It's one of two things. It's like a little plastic hook thing, right? 4 of those that hopefully don't break ever. Or it's these little brass nubs about yay big. And when you look at it, you kind of go, how in the world does that, have you ever had a shelf fall or fail? And so, as I think about that, the thing that comes to my mind over and over again is I'm always thinking, what happens if this thing just totally comes crashing down? And so, let's just pretend, thank God this didn't happen this week. Christopher didn't reach up and pull the whole thing down and have her, but let's just sort of, in our minds, pretend that this was the week that maybe I was back working on notes or the slides for the message today, and all of a sudden there's that noise, right? The noise that you instantly know because you hear it at the beginning and you're like, oh, did he break a glass? And then you're like, oh, did he break all the glasses? And then as it continues, you sort of wonder, did he somehow find a box of just broken glass that he brought in and dumped? And when this kind of thing happens, hopefully what we all do is we run to see what happened, right? What's going on? And you get there, and as you survey, let's just say that Christopher is standing around all this broken glass, that all of the shelves toppled, everything came down, hit the countertop, and here's my 8-year-old boy standing in a sea of broken glass. What am I going to do? Christopher, I cannot believe you did this. How many times have I told you to be more careful? So you know what? You're going to stand there and you're going to figure out how to clean up your mess. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to continue working on my message. And when you figure it out, you can come talk to me. Okay, but let's keep playing with me for a minute here. Some of you believe that God behaves this way, don't you? Some of us believe that God sort of looks down and he sees us in this sea of brokenness, the sea of glass of our own making, and we think that he kind of looks down and says, I told you, I gave it to you in the book, and look what you've done. And so you need to figure it out. You kind of clean yourself up, and then come talk to me. You know, like, talk to me after you kind of figured it out. We actually believe that God acts like that. And here's the problem with that. You believe sometimes that God behaves like that, but none of you for a second thought that I would do that to my 8-year-old son. None of you for even a second. Which means some of you actually believe that I have more compassion than God. Which means you believe that I'm more compassionate than God, which actually means you believe that I am more godly or godlike than God, which is completely untrue in every way, shape, or form. But it just also might mean that there's something about God then that we don't really know or we haven't learned yet. And so, if this happened to Christopher, the thing I would do, the thing we would all do, is, we'd kind of like get rid of some of the bigger pieces, and then with some kind of footwear on, I would crunch over that glass, and I'd pick up my boy, and I'd rescue him, right? I mean, this is what any father would do for their kids, isn't it? This is what we would all do. And then when Christopher was sort of safe, then this is what happens, right? Have you ever had this happen? Have you ever had a mess so big that you didn't even really know where to start? Or nice. We'll talk and maybe pray later. You didn't even know how it was ever going to get cleaned up. Is this not true? I remember one time I bought a gallon of paint and then had to slam on the brakes. And in the back of my Subaru, I even had the mat, like the little protective edged rubber mat. That can was actually white primer. It opened, it flooded that whole thing, it went over. It took me like 5 days of constantly cleaning and hosing, and so I was just, it's just nuts what happens when things just get this messy. So this is what I would do. I would crunch across the glass to get my son. Have you ever had some mess in your house that was so bad where you kind of looked at it and you thought, you know what? Maybe we should just sell. I don't know how we're going to get this done, so if we just moved, we could start over and eliminate the problem. This is similar to what's happening here in our story. Humanity was so messed up, was so broken, was so off track, was so sinful. For those of you who think that we live in a bad world or that our world's going to hell in a handbasket or things are just getting worse and worse and worse, it doesn't even hold a candle to what they experienced. So it was the survival of the fittest and the survival of the richest. You want to kidnap someone? Great. You want to do slavery? Absolutely. You could take anything and anyone you wanted. And so here we see God staring into the mess and wondering, what am I going to do? Am I going to have compassion? And how am I even going to begin this? Or maybe God thought, am I just going to hang a sign with these words on the world, out of order, and I'm going to go do something somewhere else, right? God will just move and kind of pick up his business. And so all three faith traditions believe that God decided to wade into the mess of humanity and that he decided to do something, and that it started with this man named Abraham. And it actually started around 1876 BC. This is where God interrupts humanity and he starts fixing the mess. Now, here's the thing. He picks Abraham to start fixing the mess with, but Abraham was a totally normal guy. And here's what I mean by that. He was so normal that he messed a whole bunch of stuff up himself. He was messed. So like this one time, he and his wife, Sarah, were going through Egypt, and it was when she was young and beautiful, and some of Pharaoh's officials noticed how beautiful she was, and so because Pharaoh was Pharaoh and they were in Egypt, he could take whatever he wanted. Remember I just told you that? And so they told Pharaoh, and so Pharaoh was like, yeah, I kind of want her. And so they came to Abraham and said, hey, is that your wife? And he's starting to think, you know what? They want to take my wife. And if I say yes, I may lose my life in the process. So the hero of our story, this godly man, Abraham, what does he do? He says, my wife, well, she's more like a sister. So yeah, you can have her. This is what... Now, if you feel like you ever have loyalty issues in your marriage or your relationships, come on. I mean, isn't this worse? This is what Abraham does. He was completely normal. Can you even imagine this? But God had to start somewhere, and so he picks imperfect Abraham. Isn't this good news? He uses Abraham. And then here's what he says to him. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. God's basically saying, abandon your entire circumstance. At this point, he had no children. At this point, when he was leaving, his wife had gotten old enough that it really wasn't likely she was going to have any kids. And God says, I'm going to isolate you. You're going to be by yourself. You're going to go out on your own like this with just your family. But trust me, because I am going to do a brand new thing in and through you. And then he makes them three promises, and I want to show you these as the text goes on. He says this, I will make you into a great nation. Isn't this true? Hasn't this come true? When you think about this, now Israel says, the Jews say, it's us, like we're the great nation. And the Arab nations say, it's not them, it's us, we're the great nation. But nobody disagrees that the people and the nations that have come from Abraham are just this. They're great. They've made a huge impact in the world. And so think about this. If you're going to become a great nation, what would be the starting point of that? Wouldn't you have to have a great family first before you have a great nation? And Abraham's wife is really kind of past those years. And so this is a little bit of a crazy thing. At best, he's thinking this is going to take a long, because even if everything's good and even if he has a family, take a family and make it into a nation, doesn't that take a while? A generation or two maybe, right? And at worst, it's really never actually going to happen. It's kind of a nice story. It's a nice thing. This would be like if you called 911 because you needed the police, and they answered and said, hey, good news. We just ordered some new police cruisers, And GM is going to build those for us at some point in the future. And then after they're built, they'll get shipped here. And then we'll kind of make them into how we need them. And then when those are ready, we'll be right over. Right? Like this is really what's happening here in the text. And then we have promise number 2. This is great. He says, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. Now I'm going to ask a question. We're going to do a quick survey, and I want every single person to participate, okay? If you have heard of Abraham before the message today, if you have heard of him, even if you really don't know a whole bunch, if you've ever heard of Abraham, Father Abraham, if you've ever heard of this guy at all, just heard his name in conjunction with this actual guy, would you raise your hand? It seems like every single one of us, right, have heard of Abraham. That's pretty interesting. Pretty much all of us. How about this guy? How about Chedorlaomer? Anybody heard of his name? Nobody? Chedorlaomer was the king of Edom. Now, many of you are going, Edom? Right? Like, anyone heard of Edom? Because here's the thing, Edom used to exist and the ground's still there, but it's not called Edom anymore, so the kingdom of Edom doesn't exist anymore. But Chedorlaomer was this great king that everyone knew, and he was famous. He was famous at the time of Abraham. So the time of Abraham, everybody knew Chedorlaomer, and nobody knew Abraham. This is interesting. And so God says, I'm going to take a nobody and make his name great. And I'm going to take a somebody, this famous king who everyone knew, and says, sorry. 4,000 years from now, when Rob stands up on stage at New Hope Community Church in Loudonville, Ohio, and says, anybody know Chedorlaomer? Nobody is going to raise their hand because nobody is ever going to have heard of him. And isn't it amazing that 4,000 years later, halfway around the world, in a different culture, in a different language, almost every single one of us have heard of Abraham. Didn't God make his name great? And then here's the third promise. And all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. Now, peoples is important because it's not just talking about one group of people or another, that all the people groups of the world will be blessed through Abraham. So this idea of being blessed means that the people are going to be influenced, and ultimately people will be better off. Now, the Muslims say, hey, it's our discipline and it's our belief that has made the world better. And it's the Jews when they say, hey, just look at our influence and our wealth and our significance. We've made the world better. And it's the Christians who go, no, it's us. It's how we started hospitals and we reach out and we feed people and, we do all these wonderful things. It's us. And God would say, that's my point, right? That even though they all disagree, all three of these peoples, these groups, these religions come from this starting person of Abraham. And when you look at the difference they've made, people can disagree about that, but nobody can disagree with the fact the world has probably been more blessed through Abraham than anyone else and what's happened through him and since then. But Abraham's getting old and there's still no kids. And so everything he has done, everything he's worked for, his entire inheritance. What happens if you die and you have no kids? Well, he knew that everything would go to Eleazar, maybe another guy you've never heard of. Eleazar was Abraham's chief servant. And so Abraham is having this conversation with God like many of us would. And he's like, God, I've done everything you've asked. I've followed through. I've left everything I've known. And you've kind of given me this promise. But God, here's the deal. It's not just that I'm not a nation. It's that the first step hasn't even happened yet. I don't even have a son yet. And probably at this point and at this age, he's saying, I don't even care so much about the nation, God. I would love a son. I want to know that things can continue on. So one night, as he's praying in desperation. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been there where you're just like, you come to your end and it's like, God, you've said this and I've tried to trust you, but man, I'm at the end of my rope. And so he's praying in desperation. And here's what God says to him. Then the word of the Lord came to Abraham. This man, Eleazar, will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And then he says this, and this is awesome. He took him outside and said, so cool, look up at the sky and count the stars. If you can even count them, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. We get this. If you live in a city, if you've ever lived in a big city, this doesn't make any sense. You're like, I look up in the sky and I see like 3 stars. And then I notice one is flashing, and so that's like a jet, right? So there's like 2, and you're like, 2? But isn't it great to live in a place like here where there's not much light pollution and you go out at night? I remember as a kid growing up in Canada, I'd go out, I'd lay on the picnic table a lot of nights, and I'd just watch like the northern lights dance across the sky and just see like millions of stars everywhere, more than I could ever count. And that's what would have been their experience with this vast Middle Eastern sky, no light pollution, just stars everywhere. And God is saying, Abraham, I know this makes no sense to you. I know this is hard for you to believe, but this is what your offspring's going to be. This is what your line is going to look like. And then here's the crazy part. This is where we're going to land. This is where it gets personal for you and me. I want you to see this because this is powerful and it's important. And it's amazing that this survived 4,000 years because it has profound implications. This is the first time ever recorded that God tells us what the rules are for his relationship with us. If we want to know what the terms of a relationship with him, if we're saying things like, God, can I really know? What do I have to do? Are things between us even possible? You're such an infinite, awesome, perfect God, and I'm just me. Can we even do this? And so we get this. And you've asked this. You've asked the question, can I really know? Can anyone know? I used to think so. Maybe when I was a kid, or they taught me that in Sunday school, I used to think that. And so this statement is so significant. And it's where the 3 major world religions actually diverge. And all of the religions, including us, including Christians, we actually, none of us take this statement for what it is. We always add more stuff to it. And it's so unbelievable, and it's so unbelievably simple that it seems like it's almost too good to be true. But this statement was given hundreds of years before the 10 Commandments. It was given before the law. It was given 2,600 years before Islam, 2,000 years before Jesus, before Moses, before any other really religion even existed. We were given this. Check this out. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So what does God say to Abraham? What do you need to do to be good with me? You need to believe. You need to trust. Your faith, your belief, your trust. This is the one and only thing that makes things good between us. Hey, when you had no kids and I told you were going to have kids, you trusted me. You believed. Hey, by the way, that little embarrassing incident with Sarah when she was young over in Egypt, when you kind of gave her to Pharaoh for a while, you know what? That was horrible, but I'm not going to hold that against you because this is all about your trust in me, period. Another way to say it is this way. Trusting God resulted in a right standing with God. This is the first implications that human beings could have a right standing with God. Before this point in time, I don't know that anyone would have even thought or seen this as possible. And yet everybody missed it, right? Everyone has missed this. The Jews, let's put the 3 up there. The Jews, they would have said, oh, no, it's about being Jewish, and we're the children of Abraham, and that's where it's all about. So you can kind of become Jewish too. You can be grafted in. You can follow the law just like us. And they missed it so much that when Jesus came, they said, hey, we don't need you because we got Abraham, right? And then the Muslims, they miss it too. About 620 AD, the Muslims say, you got to believe in the prophets. And then your works and acts of righteousness, you do as many of those as you can, and in the end, Allah will look and he'll see if your good has outweighed your bad, and then he'll decide. How great is that, right? You can't know, and in the end, the kind of measured, and he'll tell you whether you're in or out. Ugh. And then even Christians, we've done this as Christians too, right? After about 27 minutes after Jesus left, didn't we start to debate and disagree? Well, come on, what do we need to do? Well, I think what we really need to do is we need to have people kind of be Jewish, and they need to follow all the law, and don't they need to eat certain things and be circumcised and all that stuff? Well, I don't know if they really need. And so there's all these discussions, and right up until today, the church still debates this. What are all the things we need to do to make sure that we are good with God? Does it have to do with our birth? Is it the kind of family or the kind of faith we were born into? Does it have to do with our behavior? If we can just get enough things right and sort of stack up good deeds more than bad stuff? Is it our belief? If we just get all the sort of structures and theories and things in our mind right, is that good enough? So what is it? Is it birth, behavior, belief, a combination maybe of all 3 of those things in some way, shape, or form? Because this thing here is what God says and what God said before any of the other things existed, before any of the other world religions existed. He says, trust me. If you just trust me, that's what you need to do. There is no magic formula. It's not about who your family is or about perfect behavior. And it's so simple, most people have a hard time believing it. In fact, it's so simple that it can be almost impossible to believe. But will you do what Abraham did? Will you believe? And so what if the starting point for a relationship with God is trust? Sounds simple, right? It is simple. Would it really be good news if it was hard and not simple? Now, it's simple, but it isn't easy. Because life isn't like this, is it? It's not just, hey, trust and everything works out in life. Is school like this? If you just sort of trust your teacher, do you get good grades? And the sad thing is, a lot of times our experience with church hasn't even been like this. We've had bad experiences with people and Christians in church. Sometimes this isn't easy because of people like me, sort of in my desire to want people to love God more and be more committed. We add all of our stuff in on top of it too. But what if it was just this easy? I want you to check out this video as you think about that question. Check this out. It's not easy to trust when God makes a promise, but there's no sun. When the way seems impossible. When our life is really hard. But God says this crazy thing. He says, if you will trust me, we're good. Isn't that insane? If you'll trust me, even when it looks impossible, we're good. So I want to give you some homework. I want you to think about this. Which of the following is your view? We have some things here. Put those up. God accepts me based on my birth, family, the faith I was born into, my behavior, me doing enough things right to earn it or prove, my belief, all the things that I know and the ways that that I figured out God, or a combination of those. Now some of you are going, well, it's not my view anymore because today you've convinced me, right? Oh, it was that one song or that crazy video. Yeah, no. My goal isn't to convince you. I don't want you to believe something because I was able to talk you into it. I want you to believe something because it's true. And if you will wrestle with it and you will experience God as he truly is, it will change your lives. And so today, as you leave from this place, I'm wondering if you'll ask this question as a family, as you drive home. If you're in a small group, wrestle with that question this week. Why do you think that God accepts you? And I want to pray for us, and we're gonna sing a song. Maybe you just want to sit and listen to it. Maybe you want to stand and sing. However you want to do that's fine. But I really want you to begin to wrestle and struggle with this question as we pray together and as you just hear these words about trust. What does your faith look like? What does your trust in God look like? Does it all have to be lined up? Does it all have to make sense for you to fall? Or will you trust God no matter what? And so, Father, today we just want to thank you so much for this incredible conversation that we see. And I thank you that you've preserved this for 4,000 years, that we can see in the life of Abraham that it was because he trusted you, because he believed, that you said, you're good, you're righteous. It wasn't because of his perfect behavior or his perfect belief or anything else. It's because he trusted you. So God, today I just pray this week you would help us to really wrestle with how we trust you. What does our faith look like? And I pray that because of that, because we're willing to engage and have these conversations with each other as families, with friends, whatever, that God, we would take another step and you would help us to grow closer to you and have a faith that makes a difference in our lives and in our world. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.